I was an editor at Farrar, Straus and Giroux in New York. I was editor-in-chief, and one of my simple pleasures was to shut my office door and read the slush pile. And so one day I came across a manuscript, and it was from a writer in St. Louis that I didn't know, and I read it and I thought, wow, this is good. And you know, when it's the slush pile, you don't really expect to find maybe 1 in 100 that you might think about publishing. And always then the big question is, can they revise? And so I found her phone number of this Jan Greenberg, whom I'd never heard of and never met, and called her up.
This was in 1978. It was the middle of summer. I had written the book, which is the first novel called A Season in Between, and I, in those days, of course, there were no computers, no email, no sending enclosures, and I Xeroxed a whole bunch of them after typing it many times on this old typewriter. And I did something that Sandra told me later was a no-no in publishing. I multiply submitted it to like 15 different publishers, gleaned from my children's librarian at their school, telling me who did the best books in middle grade and young adult fiction. And there was Sandra on the phone with her wonderful voice, and she said, "We really enjoyed your book. However, you can't end a children's book, or it's not recommended to end a children's book at a funeral." The story had been autobiographical, as most first novels are, and it was about being in 6th grade, growing up in St. Louis, going to a private girls' school. The spring my father became very ill, and I wrote it as an autobiography to share with my daughters, my 3 young daughters at the time, young. Now they're all grown up and living in New York. And as I began to write the book, I started exaggerating the details of my life, and pretty soon I had 150 pages about a girl growing up in St. Louis, but somewhere along the line I started lying my head off and it became a novel. And my children and their friends, and I was teaching at Webster University at the time, and they suggested I see if I could get it published. Well, a little encouragement went a long way, because when Sandra said you need to find a resolution to this story, the next 3 weeks I wrote 3 more chapters, and the rest between us is history, and that's how we first met. Both of us Midwesterners, Sandra from Cleveland, me from St. Louis, the same age, and that began our first collaboration.